the only way that they hide stuff is by putting lots of disinformation out front and center and hyping it up with massive. They have a massive ability to just reach humongous audiences, and then they tap into people who have that ability, like people like Joe Rogan. Sadly, I believe. I don't know. I'd love to go. I'd love to go on his show and ask him why he still believes Bob Lazar almost a year later and has done like literally no research into the case. He's like every time he's like asking questions about it, he's still learning about it. I know. I'm sorry. I can't. I shouldn't even go on the Bob Lazar thing. My friend's so upset about it though, and he's the guy that I built Bob Lazar debunked.com with. One of these guys that I met, a researcher, probably about 12 years ago. Let me get back to how I met Dan first off and why we got involved in doing such extensive research into Bob Lazar and some of these other physics characters, because that's what I deal with, is the human resources and evaluation of like who these people are. And then
why don't we say, just before you start this, like who Bob Lazar actually is for anyone listening who doesn't know. So Bob Lazar is a scientist who claimed to have worked at Area 51 and S4, and claimed to have maybe seen like some worked on like UFO craft and potentially maybe seen like an alien. But yeah, there's a few holes in this.
Well, he said he thought it was an alien, and then later on he changed the story and said he thought it was a doll. You said he's a scientist, but that's not really confirmed. He owns a scientific supply company called United Nuclear, which he started in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, right around the time that he was running a explosives expose called Desert Blast. Okay. And George Knapp, when he first interviewed Bob Lazar, he claims that he had never known Bob Lazar prior to this and that he had just met him. But it's untrue, because he had covered Desert Blast in 86 and 87. And the Desert Blast Festival, which was covered by KLS, and George Knapp was the reporter on that. And the Desert Blast Festival was run by Gene Huff and Bob Lazar, the two guys who directed the Lazar tapes, which was the first commercially successful enterprise that came from that Lazar story. They sold a DVD and these things, the Lazar tapes. It wasn't a DVD. It was actually, this was back in the days of VHS.
Yeah, video
VHS tapes of this thing, and they for $30 a piece, and they made like $500,000. And they tried to get, and we have documents now that shows that they tried to get funding from John Testers of Testers Corporation to fund this, and they basically they asked him for $50,000 to make the documentary, and that he was going to get paid $500,000 or up to, they'd make millions in return, for what the film would be worth and what they could sell it for. So I don't know. I look into Bob Lazar's history. He did have some. He did work at the Meson Physics Facility, which is interesting, back in 1981. So like 8 years prior to when he claims that he was hired for this top secret program where he was brought out to Area 51, and then they brought him to the secret subsection of Area 51, which he claims was at Papoose Lake. We've got all the satellite photos going back. He claims that there was a guard shack there, all this stuff. We've gone through and like every piece of that story in like with a fine-tooth comb, and it's none of it holds up. There's nothing there at that base. The real S4 is at Tonopah test site. He got that information from his friend Jim Tagliani, who was one of the guys that went up on the hill to go and film the UFOs with him. It was a whole group of UFO like buff people that were like doing this, and they like all these people like have something to gain by selling this story or pushing this story. And as it shows, like John Lear, who was the guy that basically have the whole testimony from John Lear of how he met Bob Lazar. You go back and it's just crazy going into that whole case. I didn't mean to take a detour on Bob Lazar, but it just is one example.
That's all right. No, so but like
I think it actually is a good example because it shows people, because everyone thinks that this guy's a physicist. He portrays himself as a physicist. And I think it's funny because when you dig into it, you find that he has no curriculum vitae, which is your CV. It's like what papers you've published or what kind of work you've done. All right. And I'm not a physicist either in that regard. Okay. I have a bachelor's degree in physics from Bridgewater State University. I went to a state college and I got a physics degree. I had to learn math. I had to do math, and I know how to do a lot of math, and I know how to read papers and stuff. And that's pretty much what I do with my time, is reading papers and finding stuff like, all the stuff that's in this that DIA report that I sent you earlier. That I said, this is stuff that I've been talking about for 10, 15 years now. Some of it just came out in the last 4 or 5 years, and to my knowledge anyway, even though this shows that they've been working on it for about the same amount of time, 10, 15 years. Some of this goes back 20 years. So this is interesting stuff. It's like confirmation of a lot of the research that I did. And of course, there's nothing about element 115 in there, which was Bob Lazar's famous claim to fame disclosure. We actually traced back everything that we could find on element 115 through the literature, and we actually traced it back to a May 1989 issue of Scientific American magazine, which had all the element 115 stuff, the island of stability, all that stuff on isomers and isotopes. And it was kind of an interesting to find that was the same exact month and year that Bob Lazar came out with his story. And
yeah, that seems like a touch convenient.
And it's funny. It's everyone trusts George Knapp, and they think that he's like the greatest thing in ufology and like this beacon of truth. And the guy made his career off selling Bob Lazar for 30 years. And I know for a fact that case is a lie. I know every single bit of it. I would be able to, if I got on Joe Rogan and he got me on with Bob Lazar for a debate, I would end him in like 5 questions. I mean, it would be over. And I know other people that have asked him similar questions. So maybe he's, he might try to get, some coaching and stuff. He'd have to go on with Jeremy Corbell, his bulldog. And then Jeremy Corbell would try to, I don't know. He's always got to have a handler with him, beside him, whenever he talks. And that's just nonsense. There's other physicists out there. I've been trying to get people to pay attention to this stuff. And then we have Joe Rogan, this massive platform, just, hammering away at this 30-year-old case that there's nothing there, bro. Bigelow is keeping his cards tight to his chest. This FOIA that was released shows that Bigelow Aerospace had contracts to do a lot of this research into metallic glass and these other technologies, which they're not talking about. Hint, hint. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It couldn't be more obvious to me what's going on, having been, researching this as long as I have and being involved with this. It's like, I couldn't be more obvious what they're doing with the public's attention.
Well,
you know what I mean?
What I'm going to do is when I put this podcast out, I chop it up into clips, and we'll make this Bob Lazar section a thing, and I'm going to tweet it endlessly at Joe Rogan until he hears it and challenge him. I don't know if he'll respond, but you never know.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Well, I know
I'm doing my own thing. I have enough audience, and it's the audience that's interested in this already. You know what I mean?
Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and to our mailing list. And don't forget, my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. You'll find the link in the description below. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.